Okay, now let's compare Israel and us, Israel, and ancient Israel. Now, why did that happen? That Israel was taken captive into Babylon. Remember, by Nebuchadnezzar, they were taken there. They were only brought there for 70 years. Now, when we read that in a book, we read they were in captivity for 70 years. It doesn't sound like much, but just think about this. If your grandparents were taken captive with your parents as little children, let's say between 5 and 10 years old, or 1 and 10 years old, they were taken as little children, your parents, with your grandparents, adults, captive to a foreign country. Let's say a country like, I don't know, any country, but let's just say Germany, okay? But it could be any country. I didn't pick Germany for any specific reason. So they take your grandparents to Germany, but now you're not allowed to leave for 70 years. I'll say, okay, so your grandparents could be anywhere in their 20s to their 40s. Your parents are little kids. Your parents, by the time they grow up, they're going to be speaking fluent German. That's what happens when you're a little kid, 1 to 10 years old. You, by the time your whole life, you're going to think of yourself as a German. You're not going to think of yourself as what your parents' nationality was. In this case, I think I'm talking to a lot of Americans and Canadians. You're going to think of yourself as a German. You're going to speak German fluently. You might speak English if your parents kept it up in the house, but your parents were also little kids, and so their German is going to be stronger than their English. Their parents, your grandparents, will know English better than German, but you will identify as a German. So now, how many years have gone by? Still only maybe 50 or 60 years. And then you could even have your kids. So imagine, this is what happened to ancient Israel when they were taken into Babylon. There were probably around probably three generations that lived there. Maybe even 4, depending on how young people had kids. So they started to identify not with Israel or their Hebrew culture, although they did try to keep that strong in some cases. But remember, the reason they were taken captive is they were lacking in keeping Yahweh's commandments. They weren't taken captive for good behavior. They were taken captive for bad behavior. They were straying from what they're supposed to do in the Bible. Remember, ancient Israel always, and they got into some nasty stuff with child sacrifices, and they would start worshiping these false Baal gods and Elohim and stuff like that. So this was a punishment to them to be taken into Babylon. And after these generations, they probably could still speak some Hebrew, but they also knew the Babylonian language. And I don't know if in that whole area of the Middle East spoke Aramaic at that time. Might have been. But the culture was Babylonian. Even we know that Hebrew changed. Before they went into captivity, Hebrew, they call it Paleo-Hebrew, which was, if you looked at it, it looks more like sticks and something, I don't know how else to say it, but something like maybe a caveman would write. It has strange kind of, you could Google that, Paleo-Hebrew, and you'll see the shapes of the letters, compared to modern Hebrew, which started from that point on. When they were in captivity, they came out with modern Hebrew, which are the Hebrew letters that we see today that are kind of squarish. And they got names of months that they didn't have before, and those names came from Babylonian names, and a lot of things. It affected the language. The Hebrew language is not 100% pure. It's been infected or polluted by the Babylonian experience. Okay, now let's look at us. We know that Israel split off into 2 parts. You had Judah, which was in the south, which was kind of composed of Judah and Levi and some of Benjamin. And then in the north, you had the other tribes. You can look them up. They're like Simeon, Naphtali, Joseph's 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and Asher, and all of the other names, the other ones. They were taken. No, they weren't the ones taken into captivity. They were taken away a long time before that, and they were just dispersed As they call the diaspora, is the dispersal. They were just taken away into the rest of the world, basically. And a lot of times we only thought, and I used to think this too, that they only went to Europe and the US and North America. But really, if you do a good study on this, they were dispersed into the whole world. So there is Israel descendants. I'm not saying Jew. I'm not calling them Jews. That's Judah. I'm saying Israel, which still received the promise through Abraham. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob's sons were all of the tribes, not just Judah. And so if we are descendants of some of those tribes, it really doesn't matter, because once we're baptized into Yeshua, then through him, he was part of a descendant of the tribe of Judah. Then we have access to that promise to Abraham anyway. But there are descendants of those, they call them the lost tribes, but really those tribes are all over the world. Everywhere. They're in India, Asia, Africa, the Americas. They're really everywhere. But there are Gentile people too, people who have absolutely no Israelite blood. But that's okay, because we all have access to Yahweh through Yeshua. But it still is interesting to know that, so there are a lot of Israelites, spiritual and physical, who are in, and when I say that, I'm not saying Jews. Remember that, I'm not saying Jews, I'm saying Israelites, descendants of Jacob and Israel and Abraham and Isaac, who are captive. They're held captive inside of Babylon. Babylon is the United States. They're not the country. The country of the United States is not Israel, but Israel is held captive within Babylon. And Yahweh says, my people come out of her. Just like they had to come out of ancient Babylon, Israel had to leave. Do you know how many people study this? Go back into the Old Testament. See how many actually left ancient Babylon when finally Yahweh opened the door that they could go back to Jerusalem, back to Israel. They didn't all, 100% didn't go back. I think around 20% actually went back to Israel. Many of them stayed there in Iraq, which was ancient Babylon, which is ironic because many of the Iraqis today who hate Israel probably have Israeli blood because they were mixed in. They would hate to even hear that too. But some Jews stayed there too, and Christians. But Israel is in Babylon now, the United States, all of North America, and Yahweh is calling them out again. You see, it's happening again. That's why it's so important to study the old, what happened in the old, to see to not repeat the same mistakes. So we need to come out of her, my people, says Yahweh, and realize that as Israel, spiritual or physical, if you're part of Israel, and you probably are, you're in captivity in Babylon, and you don't even realize it. It's the worst type of captivity, or the best type as far as the slave owner or the your master would be concerned, because he has you as a captive and you don't even realize it, because he keeps you fat and happy and you're staying there in your captivity. Why would you want to leave? Why would any American or Canadian want to leave? They live in like the best places and country in the world. And that's why it's really hard. And I know for those of you who are thinking about leaving, it's a hard decision because you know you're going to be going from more to less. But you're going from more to less physically, but you're probably going, most likely, I can almost guarantee you're going from less to more spiritually. So it's not going to be easy, but it'll be well worth it. So start preparing yourself physically and mentally for this, and hopefully I'm going to try to continue doing more messages. If you like, please write to me and give me ideas of things you want to know about. If you're planning and thinking about leaving the U.S., let me know what's on your mind, what you want to hear, what your anxieties are, or what your hopes are. And let's hear like what you want to know, what you have to do. I'm going to try to think of as many things as I can talk about, from the physical preparations and visas and money and preparing yourself, to the spiritual. And the spiritual is a lot more important, actually, because a lot of people get all the physical stuff together, they leave, but because they're not spiritually, their mind and their heart, just like Lot's wife, is still in Babylon. Well, that was Sodom and Gomorrah, of course, but it's a sinful place. Her mind was still there. She turned to a pillar of salt. And so a lot of the people who were like that, they wind up going back to the United States because their spirit was never, their heart was in the U.S.